but I think we do have a quorum, so that's good. So,
Yeah, you're right.
well, hopefully she shows up soon. I guess in the meantime, should we take roll call?
Yeah, if you want, you can start the meeting.
Yep. Okay, let's get it going. So
Let me do the roll call. Brenda Morris. Melanie.
I'm here.
Jennifer.
Here.
Ned.
here.
Wesley.
Here.
Sean is absent. Ron.
Here.
And Alexander.
Present.
Great, yeah, we have a quorum.
Okay. Is there any new business before we start the presentations? Any questions or anything? Okay, if not, I guess we get going on the transportation fee projects, right? I think that's the first one. And then the finances after that, right?
Correct.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Good evening. It's Karen Hoffman, the city engineer, here to talk about capital projects associated with the transportation utility fee. And at the end, I'll also talk about the other transportation projects that are through other means, and I'll let people know what that is, what those are when we get there. Next slide, please. So for some background, actually, I'll note first off that we have about 75 centerline miles of street within the city of Newberg. And in July of 2016, an ad hoc committee was formed to begin work on finding a way to fund pavement maintenance. Up until then, we had basically the gas tax coming in, which was all we had to try to fund pavement. And what we were looking at was the goal of maintaining the PCI over the next 10 years. So that work with that ad hoc committee led to a implementation of a transportation utility fee to raise approximately $1.2 million a year for pavement maintenance. And the implementation of that fee occurred on the September 27th municipal services statement. Next slide, please. So when we talk about PCI, that's pavement condition index is what that is. And it's basically a grading system for the roads. So everything from A to F. And what you have on your screen is some just examples of what the different types or levels of the roadway look like. So to note, when we started this process in, again, 2017, most of our roads were between the good and the very good. But there was obviously, when you average them out, obviously there were several that were in the poor, very poor, or even gravel category. We actually have about 5 miles of gravel streets within the city of Newberg. Next slide, please. And this is a graph of what pavement life looks like. And when we first pave, obviously we're at very good. And then what happens is when you hit the 75%, it drops off relatively quickly. So if we can keep the pavement condition between that fair and very good, we have a lot better chance to keep that pavement up. Once it starts to drop off, you're really looking at reconstructing the entire roadway. As long as you keep it up above that 75% or that 40% drop in PCI, you can still do things like slurry seal or crack seal, do some thin lift overlay, some really more what we would consider minor maintenance versus complete reconstruction.
Karen,
So yes.
I know a lot of it depends on the amount of usage, but can you put like an approximate age? You know, I mean, there's no time there. This is just like percentages. I mean, like Pavement Life, 20 years, 30 years till it drops off.
Generally, we design pavement to be 20 years.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Some are more. If you see a concrete street, that's actually designed for like a 75-year life.
Oh, okay. Good to know.
It's a lot more expensive to construct a concrete street and a lot tougher to do any kind of maintenance on it.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
next
thanks.
So some things to note that came out of the transportation utility fee, and this is all written into the code. So a maximum of 70% of the revenue every year is proposed to be allocated to preservation of good or fair streets, and then a minimum of 30% to reconstruct the poor to very poor streets. So when we build our 5-year plan, we're always looking at trying to spend at least 30%, if not more, on poor to very poor streets, while still trying to make sure that those good to fair streets stay in that good to fair category. So fee waivers were built in for vacancies of buildings, for low income, for people with no vehicles, or people with unemployment issues. The transportation utility fee cannot be used for any other city purpose. It's used solely to pay for items basically between the curbs. So patching, sealing, grinding, inlaying, overlaying, and then the associated ADA improvements that have to go along with that. The requirements of the ADA are that if we construct or reconstruct a street, we are required to add ADA ramps. And then the transportation utility fees imposed upon all owners of all developed property within the corporate limits of the city of Newberg. And we do prepare an annual street maintenance program report. We've kept it pretty simple up till now. Generally, I provide that as part of the CIP presentation that I make to the council every year in the spring. Next slide, please. So the other thing that was written in was that that the transportation utility can be modified biannually, and that's based on the Citizen Rate Review Committee reviewing the program on the biannual basis and recommending any modification. So it could be based on cost of service adjustment, inflationary index, new revenue, road condition assessments, fee termination, and it can be adjusted up or down. If we got to a point where, all of our streets were in great condition and was forecasted to remain that way, we might recommend that the fee go down at some future date. Next slide, please. So I wanted to show a picture, and I'll apologize, I know this is hard to read. I can get you this in a paper copy or in a larger version. But what I wanted to really show was how many projects we've completed since 2017. These include complete rehabilitation and crack and slurry seal projects. And you'll see that we've really been trying to get all over town. And with the completed projects, we have maintained that PCI at 73 per the original council goal. So we have been maintaining, which was the goal. Next slide, please. And here's the projects. And again, I apologize, this one's tougher to read, is the projects that we are proposing to do over the next 5 years. Part of the issues are, and we've had this conversation before about, we want to make sure we're not paving a road and then having to turn around relatively soon afterwards and dig it up to replace the water pipe or the sewer pipe or those types of things. So we've been trying to pick roads that either have those utilities, are new, or we are planning to replace those or fix those at the same time or just before we pave. So actually this coming up year, the pavement projects that are actually already under contract that haven't yet happened yet due to weather are North Street, Franklin Street, and Willamette. Those all still are scheduled to be completed before the end of June. And then the ones that we are proposing to construct this summer are Brucher from 99W down to the roundabout at Hayes, and Sherman Street. Those are the two main ones, and then the rest of them are also coming in years a little bit further out. We're running about $1.2 to $1.4 million a year with these. And obviously we adjust as needed, depending on what our revenues look like. Next slide, please. So other transportation projects that are not funded by the transportation utility fee, we have North Elliott Road sidewalks and bike lanes. We have some improvements through the Safe Routes to School grant that we received down near Edwards Elementary, which includes some sidewalks and crosswalks and some signage and those types of things. Meridian Street ADA ramps. We received a $400,000 grant from the federal government through the state, through efforts of Representative Bill Post, former Representative Bill Post, to install ADA ramps basically from Hancock Street north to Fulton, and to make that route completely ADA accessible, basically from Friendsview Manor all the way to downtown. We're also continuing to work on sidewalks along critical routes, whether that be sidewalk gaps, installing ADA ramps, or fixing sidewalks that are broken or inaccessible. We will also be looking at the intersection of Main Street, Illinois, and Highway 240. We hear a lot of times that this is an intersection that has safety concerns. And so we're going to start with actually a feasibility study to talk about what does this look like? What should it look like in the future? What are the options in order to make it safe and usable for all of the users? And so that study will be underway soon. At North Springbrook, there is a signal that will be installed at Hayworth rather than that current four-way stop. And then North College Street sidewalks and bike lanes. This is an ODOT project that the city is participating in. We provide a 10% match for that, but they will be installing bike lanes on both sides of the road and sidewalks on the west side, north to Quail. And all of these projects are funded either by the gas tax that we receive or system development charges, which we've talked about before, which come from the developers.
Karen, just a mechanical question. Main Street, Illinois Highway 240, is that like Highway 240, is that a city street or county or state? I mean, are we restricted on what we can do depending on the feasibility study results?
Yeah, it's a state highway.
Okay.
So it will certainly be involved in that discussion about what that looks like, what they will be willing to allow to be installed, et cetera.
Okay.
So any other questions for me on that?
No. No.
All right.
Okay, well, I guess we go to the money side of it. So unless there are no other questions, Deb, you're up.
Okay, let me share my screen. Find the PowerPoint. Sorry, let's see. Trying to. Oh. Still not seeing it for some reason. All right, I'm gonna, let's see, we'll just share the full screen and then I'll open the, go over to the PowerPoint. Okay. How's that? Can you see the presentation cover
Yeah,
slide?
yes.
Excellent.
It's good. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay. As Karin mentioned, we, let's go back here. There we go. These fees are the newest of your utility fees and were implemented in the fiscal year 2017-2018 time period. Unlike the other fees, there was no increase in fiscal year 2019 or 2020. And you can see in this table that just shows the single family rate, which was implemented at $4.99 and stayed at that until January of 2021. And at that point was raised 2% per year, including this last year. So the current fee for a single family dwelling is $5.19. That's, and this table shows you in comparison the inflation rate as measured by the Engineering News Record Construction Cost Index for Seattle, September to September annual change. And while we were in a relatively low inflationary period in the last couple of years, the inflation in the first year since it was implemented, and certainly within the last year, would have, had these fees been tied to an inflationary index so that the purchase power of the rates stayed relatively constant, then that fee today would be $5.75, not $5.19. So while the fees have gone up, they have not gone up at a rate that's consistent with the increase, the average increase in construction costs. As Karin mentioned, the original projection of transportation utility fee or tough revenue was 1.2 million, and 65% was designed to come from non-residential and 35% from residential, based on trip generation, relative trip generation of the two broader categories, as well as some consideration for improvements on local streets that primarily serve and benefit residential customers, and larger arterial collectors that benefit non-residential customers. So you can see in this chart the fiscal year 2020, 2021, and estimated current year 2022, that actual revenues have been not quite hit that 1.2 million mark. And that's with the 2 rate increases that went into effect the last 2 years. And the other thing to note is that the actual allocation between residential and non-residential has been more like 60% non-residential and 30% residential. And the reason for that, I think, is a few factors. One is that you've had very strong growth in residential customers from new development. And so that's been outpacing the rate of growth in non-residential. And in fact, there's been some, when we look at the last couple of years, some decline in the number of service units associated with non-residential. Also, that original 65-35 split or allocation of revenue was based on estimated service units, which included brand new bases for the charge. So these charges, as we'll talk about more in the presentation, are based on things like square footage of building, gross square footage. And so the utility had to be set up with all new billing information to implement this fee. And as is generally the case, those estimates are made, and then once the fees are adopted, the city will hear from folks when they disagree with their estimates for their particular building. And so those tend to get refined. And estimates of where customers, which rates customers were subject to and in which tiers. And so I think all of that contributed to where we are now, which is slightly higher residential contribution to the total annual revenue than what was originally projected. Karin went through the individual projects, and this chart just shows the forecast, 5-year forecast of, in the blue, the pavement maintenance costs, and the red being the other projects. Because the committee's focus really just is on the TUF and how to calibrate the TUF fee levels to generate sufficient revenues for the pavement maintenance. We won't go into a lot of detail about the other costs and revenues of the system, but as Karin mentioned, there are other funding sources that cover those red components of the bar. The average over this period with the inflation projected increase in there is about 1.5 million per year. This chart shows the projected TUF revenue in the dashed purple line with a 4% increase in the rates. And the 4% is designed to make sure that basically the purple dash line combined with available fund balance from the fact that you can see in 2021, for example, the blue bar, the pavement maintenance, like other things during the pandemic, there were anticipated projects that didn't get done. And so there are some, the city built up some reserves because that's a dedicated funding source. It can only go to pavement maintenance. If the pavement maintenance is lower than the TUF revenue, then there's savings that gets held in reserve to be applied for future years. So with that reserve, as shown in the green line, and you can see how it increased, that reserve increased in 2021. In the years where the blue bars exceed the purple line, which are several of the years, then that reserve gets drawn down and applied to those projects. And by the end of the period, the purple is projected with a 4% rate increase each year would generate around 1.4 million. And hopefully that would put the TUF system, recalibrate the rates to recover those annual costs on average. So that's
Deb,
the
I got a
objective.
question, if you don't mind. So on
Sure,
here,
no problem.
you've plotted this with a 4% TUF increase, and yet on the previous table, a couple of slides back, it was just a 2% that you calculated in your later columns.
That's
So
what was implemented.
Excuse me?
Well, sorry, the
this is-
4% is only applied going forward.
Okay, so
yeah,
you're
good point, good point.
You're recommending increasing it from a 2% to 4% is what?
Yeah, so the 2% was just for 2 years in
Okay.
the last 2 years. because
Okay.
they mentioned there was nothing before that.
Right.
And what I calculated would be needed to match the pavement expenditures that are projected when we consider also the available reserve.
Mhm.
That would need to be a 4% increase. And part of that is because we're in a very high inflationary period. The rates didn't keep up with inflation, and there's a big gap as we mentioned.
Right.
And so, yeah, you've got some catching up to do if you're going to
Okay.
keep pace. And while the TUF is dedicated to those specific projects, we also like to just take a look at the total street fund forecast just to make sure. In some years earlier on, the TUF wasn't able to meet the expenditures that were planned, and so there was a little bit of gas tax money that was going to fund some of the pavement maintenance. And so this just shows that all is balanced in terms of when you consider the gas tax plus TUF in the red line, that it is sufficient to pay the rest of the expenditures that are needed for the street fund. So that includes those other capital projects as well as personnel and other operation and maintenance costs.
Okay, one more question if you've got a moment. Is
Oh,
this
sure.
a different ending fund balance? That bottom blue line on this graph is slowly increasing, but on the previous
Yeah.
graph, it's dropping like a tank.
Yeah,
That's
this
also
is
labeled ending
this is
fund
the
balance.
yeah, well, this is the street fund in total. And sorry, I'm losing my voice this evening. The prior slide was, let's see if I can page up here. This is just the TUF reserve. So here we're just looking at TUF revenues and expenses and fund, and probably it would have been more accurate and less confusing for me to call this something like TUF reserve rather than ending
Okay.
fund balance, because that
Got
does
it.
imply that there's a separate fund there, and it's really kind of it's a category within the fund.
Okay.
So that the city does track separately,
Yeah.
but it's not a fund. And so those two lines are very different. And
Okay, I
thank you
guess
for,
what threw me is you've got them both labeled ending
yes,
fund
I do.
balance.
I
So
could see where that would be confusing.
that's the question.
Thank
but
you.
Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, the street fund looks fine with the 4% because TUF is basically covering its costs, assuming the 4% rate increase. Okay, so that's kind of the picture of overall revenue. And just to, many of you have not been part of the committee before, and talk a little bit about the rate structure, that the customer bills, when this was set up, reflect two primary variables, and that is the intensity of use and having a higher cost per unit for those customers that where their businesses or the type of residential has trip generation, relatively higher trip generation. So this is all about use of the street network. And so the rates reflect the intensity of trip generation and the size of the customer. So we know from industry manuals where cities all across the country submit, do traffic studies that estimate or count trips, cars coming in and out of driveways, to estimate the use or the trips generated by different uses. So, and generally that is then correlated to for a non-residential customer, the building square footage, the size, because obviously, yes, the type of use has a impact on trips generated, but also the size of the customer. So a big box retail is going to have a different trip generation than a small retail, custom kind of retail. And so the equity is in terms of trying to match the payment and the rate to the use of the system. And unlike water, for example, where we can measure for each individual customer how much water comes through your meter, we can't do that for transportation. So we rely on industry data. There are 3 residential classes based on the type of dwelling and non-residential classes based on the type of business. There are 5 general classes and lots of special classes. So the TUF has many more customer classes than the other utility fees. This gives you a summary for the standard classes. So these are the 5 different standard non-residential classes, and you can see that the rate per 1,000 square feet, that's KSF, is the units of service, varies from $3.87 per month to about slightly over $100 a month for the most intensive uses. So these are, you think about a lot about people coming in and out of coffee shops, fast food restaurants, convenience markets, things like that. And from a square footage, trips generated per square foot, you see many fewer trips for typical office buildings or industrial warehousing type uses. So the fee is set based on that trip generation, and each customer's bill reflects the rate in its category, but also the customer's size in terms of square feet.
Deb, I got a very general question. Do
Sure.
a lot of towns and cities around here have this kind of a system where
Yes.
they do? Okay.
Yes.
So in other words, this isn't a deterrent for a potential business coming in. Oh, I've got this extra fee. The fee is probably in many other places as well. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. And there will be variations within the rate structure in terms of like the number of customer classes.
Mm-hmm.
Newberg adopted 5. We considered lots of different models. There were some cities that had 7 or 8 different classes, some that had fewer. But this, the committee that was working through this process at the time, special to setting up this rate, thought that this balanced equity, administrative feasibility, and all of those considerations. As I mentioned, the residential customers are charged in 3 classes. Single family, multifamily is charged less, and that's because a multifamily unit generates fewer trips than a single family unit on average. And then mobile home is charged slightly less than multifamily, again, based on trip generation studies. There are also many special classes where square footage is not necessarily the best predictor of the trips generated. So for schools, it's based on students. For hotels, hotel rooms, gas stations, based on pumps, those sorts of things. So it's a fairly complex schedule, but it's designed that way to be most equitable for customers. With the rate increases, the focusing for a moment on the single family detached housing, which are the majority of customers, that rate would go from $5.19 to $5.40 and then $5.62. So these are much lower rates than the other systems that we've been looking at. So the 4%, it would generate a much smaller incremental increase, just over 20 cents for a typical customer bill. And you can see the other classes. The 4% in this case is applied across the board. And at some point in the future, the committee may want to, reconsider as growth has occurred and pavement maintenance work has continued, and looking at, again, kind of both from a trip generation standpoint and the the roads that benefit the residential customers primarily versus the larger arterial collector type roads that are more sized and related to non-residential. Does that 60-40 split, which we're seeing now, still make sense? At this point, I don't think, this is still a relatively new fee. And based on the very detailed work that the committee did previously, I think that there's at this point no reason technically to apply anything other than across the board. But it's something to keep an eye on, just to make sure that as these rates get applied and growth happens at different rates by customer class, and the city builds new roads and is bringing the inventory of roads up to higher pavement index, just to make sure that it's being distributed, the costs and the revenues are being distributed fairly. So right now we're starting from a rate that is below what an inflation adjusted, fully inflation adjusted rate would be. My crystal ball probably isn't any better than anybody else's with respect to inflation, but I do, what we tend to do is look at the multi-year average to say, well, if things over the last 10 years are a indicator of what we're going to see in the future, then we would see about a 3.5% per year increase. Things haven't exactly been typical in the last couple of years, so there's probably some greater uncertainty, and but we have to project forward with something. And if we use the 3.5%, then relative to the 4% rate increase, maybe we would gain a little ground to have that rate, the actual rate, be closer to what the inflation adjusted rate would be. But it's very possible that 2023 inflation rate could outpace the actual the 4% user fee rate. So we'll just have to see on that. But the 4% is, again, was calculated not really based on trying to tie it to the inflation rate, but tie it to a level that would fund the projected annual costs, and considering that reserve. That is the extent of the transportation presentation. What I was going to do then is, well, I guess there's one, usually we do a comparison. So this this kind of gets at part of your question, Ned, about this looks at for the residential customer, how your transportation utility fee specifically compares to other cities. Now, the first thing you'll notice on this is there are a handful of cities that don't charge right now a transportation fee. But of those who do, Newberg's is the lowest. So just information there.
Interesting.
So typically at this point, we look, we've been taking each of these individual systems and talking about the rate impacts and the bill comparison. And this is our opportunity also to bring it all together. But I want to pause here and just see if staff or the committee have any questions on the tough analysis and proposed rate increase.
Let me jump in really quick and just say, I know people like to compare us to McMinnville a lot. And although they have not implemented a transportation utility fee, what they did do was they went out and bonded to do a bunch of their street improvements. And so people are getting it on their, basically on their property tax bill instead as a levy. So it's not that they're not doing pavement maintenance, and it's not that the citizens or the residents of McMinnville aren't getting, aren't paying for that, but they're doing it in another manner. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out because I know that that gets brought up a lot.
Yeah, I figured they had to get it from somewhere.
That's a great point, Karin. Thanks for
Yeah, thanks.
for adding that. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and show the rest of the slides that I have, and then if there's other questions, we can certainly talk about that. Okay, so as I mentioned, this table here, we have another meeting coming where we're going to recap everything, and the committee can talk more about the individual and collective recommendations. But just as a preview, and also to prompt if there's any additional information at the next meeting that you want to see relative to any of these systems, then that's always good to know tonight. But this table shows the rate increases that we have been talking about for each of the systems, which range from, and it also shows the two systems which the committee is not talking about, but because they show up on the municipal services statement, I've put them in here because it does impact the total bill. So just the four systems that we've been talking about: water, sewer, storm, and now transportation. The rate increases that have been discussed range from 3.5% for sewer to 7.5% for storm, and 4% for both tough and water. The current bill is shown for a typical user, which for water, that would be 700 cubic feet of monthly consumption, and sewer 500 cubic feet. And you can see the current bill for each of the services and then the total. And then you can see for January 1, which is when the rate increases go into effect each year for 2023 and 2024, with those percentage increases, what the bill would be. Now, for water and sewer, you also have at play the cost of service discussion that we had. So unlike what we just talked about with the transportation utility fee being an across the board increase, which is how the stormwater is as well, there is some customer class specific shifts that resulted from the update of the cost of service analysis that we discussed as part of those meetings. And so, for example, for this typical residential customer for water, the increase would be 4% and 4.5%, and that's because of the increases in the fixed charges relative to the volume charges. So it's the individual bills will go up slightly differently than the overall percent increase, but overall the revenue for each of those systems are reflected in the columns to the far left. So the 4%, 4%. In total, the current bill is combined is just over $150, and that increases to about 160, and then 166, 60, close to rounding. So we're looking at an increase of
between $6 and $7 per month for each of the 2 years.
So I've got a real general question, and maybe Deb, Karen, or Paul, since we have several new people on the committee, could one of you explain the public safety and then the communication officer charges that are on the bill?
Karen, can you do that, or maybe Katie? I don't know.
That might be a Katie thing, but in general, I don't even know when they were implemented. They were implemented to help offset and pay for police officers and also a person in dispatch, which is the communication officer. So it was designed to help pay for those services, or some of those services. And I think it was total of 2 or 3 FTE at the time when they set it up. I do believe they are not quite making that, which is why they're talking about increasing some of those rates. But that's what those 2 are. And those are done per the municipal code and by resolution of the council. So that is not something that the rate review committee has any say over at this point in time.
Okay.
And that's becoming more common for part of what are considered general fund services. And so that would be public safety and parks and libraries, other services like that, to be funded with fees that are either specific to a service like these, or specific to an expense. In this case, it was related to specific people or positions, or just to have a general operations or general, city services fee. That is becoming more common as the revenues are not keeping pace with service level expenses. So this chart then shows you the community comparison with the combined bill. You're on the far right, and that is driven by the green bar, which is the sewer rates. We've walked through many of the other individual services and talked about how those fees are, the city's bills are in the middle, more in the middle, or certainly to the left of the top. But sewer is the largest component of the bill, and it is the highest of these communities that we have typically compared as part of this process. So it is, and sorry if that's a little hard to see, but you got a hard copy too. And it's that combined bill that includes those other charges as well, is a couple dollars higher than the next highest, Lake Oswego, driven again by the size of the sewer bill.
Just a mechanical question. It's a really small point, but on all the water bills that I've received, which obviously includes wastewater as well, we just get one volume number, like 700. And I'm not quite sure, why the 500, 200 less. It's not something that's visible on our bill as a smaller amount. We just see, for example, a winter average, which is computed for those 4 months, but never see 2 of those separate numbers like that.
So it is the winter average that you're charged based on for sewer.
Right.
So
right.
So it says it's winter average, but it doesn't provide a number. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, we get so in other words, the 500. Well, are you saying that's the winter average? The way
Yes.
Okay.
That's what we
Got it.
have assumed. Yes.
Got it.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
For some reason, I was thinking every month there was a different amount, but that's the winter. Okay.
Yeah,
26.
in some cases, there's some cities that'll charge the winter average or whatever the monthly use is, whichever is less.
Right.
But standard approach is to use the winter average for the
Right.
annual,
Okay.
and then to just update that each year.
Okay. Thanks.
So that's the presentation for tonight. This is not the full recap, but wanted to give you an opportunity to see what the combined bill looks like, both relative to the current rates and then also relative to those other communities that we compare to. And as I said, committee is welcome to ask additional questions tonight. If there are any additional information items that you need to have your deliberations at the next meeting, that would be good to know. And any other thoughts?
Let me jump in really quick too, Deb, just for future process. So the committee does have another meeting where they can talk about options and a recap. There will also be a town hall and a public hearing that the committee will hold where on top of, any public that had attended any of these meetings that could provide testimony, that it will be another opportunity. And then it will be after that town hall / public hearing where the committee will make a recommendation that we will forward onto council on what those rates will look like for the next 2 years. So now's your opportunity again, as Deb noted, to ask any questions. If you wanted different scenarios to be brought back or those types of things prior to the town hall meeting. And then after that town hall meeting, you will be, the expectation is that you will then vote to make a recommendation to the city council on what those rates will look like. So if there's anything else you guys need from us to help work through this process.
Is that town hall, does that get advertised at all? One distinct disadvantage of this Zoom format is we are not getting public comments or participation at all. And so I'm concerned, unless this town hall is widely advertised, who's going to know that it even exists?
And it does get advertised. It will get advertised on the website. It will get advertised. I don't know if you do social media, and then there's an official notice that also occurs, I believe, in the graphic.
Okay.
Also for it.
Yep.
But
with
there
the
is
current setup, the mayor's been doing a virtual like Sunday, hey, heads up. Could this be added to his agenda? Of heads up, there's a
certainly
public comment.
We can certainly propose that to him.
Good idea.
I mean, typically it's just on the website has been the advertisement in the past. And we have had people show up, whether or not they show up to a virtual thing is whatever. If I don't, Deb asked a question, if I can actually help answer or ask one thing. For every system, I would ask for like a 1-slide summary, like water. This is how much we're going to change it by, and and this is why. There's debts, we're paying off stuff, we're building up our surplus of emergency funds, what have you. I think 1 page per would really be helpful as a summary. A lot of information, a lot of data. A 1-slide summary just help for each thing we've talked about.
Great, thanks.
Karen, just one small request, and it's just me because I'm the nerd and the geek in the group. Could I have PDFs of those maps that you projected on the street projects? If you could just send them to me whenever you get a chance, or if there's more interest, maybe the committee would like to see them, but I'd be curious in having them.
Yeah, I can send you the PDF of the maps. I can send it to the entire committee. We could also, if it would be helpful, we could generate a a spreadsheet that shows all of lists them out that way, to me, that's not as useful, but that's up
I
to
think
you.
the maps would be just fine. That'd be helpful.
We can do
Thanks.
that.
They worked hard on those maps, so I think they're happy to share.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, one thing I want to mention, those maps for the next 5 years for the pavement projects, we review them each year as well. So there could be, looking at things, the fundings and all this stuff, so, and there are a lot of other that ties into utilities. So suddenly we have a windfall of some money and so that could change, so just bear that in mind.
Okay, good to know. Anyone else?
I have a quick question, Katie. On the utility bill, are there any room there to put some kind of messages? I know a long time ago, we would be able to put a one sentence or something. Thinking about this, town hall meeting, I don't mean to give ourselves more work, but I'm just thinking out for the benefit. Is there any possibility to say, well, on this day, there's a town hall meeting about utilities and people who receive utility bills that they are aware of it? That is a very easy way to do it. Just type a message in there for just that mantra bill or something like that. I'm just throwing out something.
My understanding is everything is pre-generated. It's all
Oh,
within
okay.
Springbrook, so it's not
I see.
editable, but I can
I see.
ask and find out.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no harm.
I've got room
Thanks.
for message right here under mine.
It looks like there's room, but there's not actually because of the
Yep.
program.
Yeah.
The other question, Ned, is does anybody actually read their bill?
I know. You're right. I'm in a small
Yeah.
minority.
I'll be honest. I look at the bottom line and
Yeah,
okay, and that's about it. But
yeah.
And
You can
people
also
do
put-
auto payment as well, and don't care about what is in there.
Right.
I'll work with community engagement to see if they can put out like a flyer on Facebook or Twitter. That way they know.
Yeah. Whatever to get out. Because, like, for example, do we have any public comments tonight?
No public comments
Right.
tonight.
Because seriously, in the previous cycle, 2 years ago, when we were all in person and we're in the conference room down in the treatment plant, we typically had anywhere from 1 to 3 people that came each meeting, and that's, I think it's most unfortunate. It's probably having to do with this Zoom format that we're just not getting the participation, or I don't know. I wish we had more. That's all. So
I'll say
I
that,
will
go ahead, Ron.
I'll highlight that the 3 people came at the very first meeting, the very last meeting, and then you had onesie-ish
yeah,
throughout.
Right.
And the same advertisement is there. It's being advertised on the website, on the city website. So I realize it's more convenient to show up. On the flip side of it, this is the format of the pandemic. So
right.
I agree with you. I want more input, but gosh darn it, this is what we got to deal with. All right.
Yeah, I know. It's just, people are still forever complaining about their overall water sewer bills, and yet we don't get comments that we can address here.
Well, we do, right? And that's the painful questions I was trying to ask at the very beginning of Deb. Of we're going to increase overall. We're gonna have an increase, right? Because things keep on getting more expensive, and that's why I want the one sheet summaries that go, this is why. My bill is lower when I lived in Tualatin or wherever. This is the one slide that says this is why, because our debt structure is different. We went off and had a new water treatment system, right? Or we had this or that or other. And so in theory, it's a cycle, right? At some point, our bills are going to go down, potentially. Maybe it never will, right? So on some utilities. But I think it's important that each utility has a summary. We're asking for this much, and this is the background. It's the business reason why.
Yep, that will help. Anyone else? Now's your chance. So that's it for this month till March, huh? Okay, well, I guess if there's nothing else going on, thank you very much. And
And
Karen,
as-
did you have something?
I was just gonna say, just a reminder, so March 2nd is the next recap meeting, kind of where you give the final direction for what we're gonna present at the town hall. And then the town hall is scheduled for March 16th. Hopefully everybody has that on their calendar.
Yep.
And that again will be a public hearing. And then at that meeting, after the public hearing closes, the committee will deliberate and provide a recommendation that will forward on to the city council.
Okay. Just have to get some advertising pegs in the row before that March 16th. All right, thanks. Anyone else? Now's your chance. Well, I guess not. I guess the meeting is adjourned. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you all.
you.
Take care,
Good night.
everyone.
Good
Take
night.
care.
Thank you.
Katie, she left already. Okay.